If you pick up a travel guide to Japan from, say, the mid-90s, or even an economic summary from just 10 years ago, you get the exact same story. It's almost a script. Japan is the Galapagos of the developed world. It's homogenous, it's an island, and it absolutely, definitely does not do immigration.
It is an incredibly persistent narrative, isn't it?
Yeah.
And to be fair, for a very long time, the Japanese government went to extraordinary lengths to make sure that narrative held up, at least on paper. For decades, you wouldn't even see the word immigrant in official policy. They used every euphemism you can imagine: long-term resident, technical trainee, global human resource.
Anything but the real word.
Anything to avoid admitting that people were moving there to stay.
It's like me saying I'm not eating cake, I'm just, engaging in a calorie-rich texture analysis. But here's the thing about narratives.
They eventually crash into reality.
Exactly. And the reality we're looking at today, based on this huge stack of government data and policy proposals you've brought in, is that the old story is, well, it's dead.
Completely dead. The numbers have fundamentally shifted, and they've done it a lot faster than most people realize.
Okay, so let's start with that headline number. As of June 2025, the number of foreign residents in Japan has hit a record high. We're talking about approximately 3.95 million people.
And just to put that in perspective, that's roughly the population of Los Angeles.
Wow.
Or, if you want a local comparison, it's getting close to the size of Yokohama, which is Japan's second biggest city. This is not a rounding error anymore.
And that's really the mission for this deep dive. We're not just going to stare at that 3.95 million figure. We need to unpack who these people are, because I think the image most of us have is probably totally wrong. We need to understand why the system's meant to handle them, especially this controversial Technical Intern Training Program are basically breaking down. And most importantly, we're looking at a new manifesto from our source material that suggests Japan is finally ready to start pretending.
That is the key. The source material argues that Japan is operating on this massive contradiction. You have the official stance, no immigration, and then the reality on the street, which is we completely rely on foreign labor.
That sounds like a major friction point.
It is. And when you have a gap that wide between policy and reality, that's where you get exploitation. That's where you get social friction. And honestly, that's where you get economic inefficiency.
So let's get into those demographics. Who is actually making up this city of Los Angeles inside Japan? 3.95 million people, a 5% jump from just last year. Where is this influx coming from?
Geographically, it is overwhelmingly Asian, but the shifts within that are fascinating.
Yeah.
The top dog is still China, with about 900,000 residents.
Okay, that makes
Vietnam is second at roughly 660,000. Then you have South Korea, the Philippines, and rounding out the top 5 is Nepal.
Okay, hang on. Nepal. I have to pause on that. China, Korea, Vietnam. Sure, that makes sense with the geography and history. But Nepal, I feel like 10 years ago, Nepal wouldn't have been anywhere near the top 5.
You're spot on. Nepal is the standout outlier in all the growth data. We are seeing a greater than 17% year-over-year increase. It is emerging as a major inflow country.
Why Nepal specifically? Is there a particular pipeline?
It's a combination of things. Community networks are huge, so once a community gets a foothold, it's easier for others to follow.
Right.
But also, Nepalese workers have been filling a lot of gaps in the service industry. We're talking convenience stores, restaurant chains, especially in the big cities. If you walk into a convenience store in Tokyo today, there's a very high chance the staff are from South Asia.
And when we ask, what are they doing here? I think the lazy assumption is always, oh, they're just students working part-time, or maybe temporary workers who will go home.
That is the assumption. But the data tells a very different story. And this is probably the most important takeaway from the numbers.
Okay.
If you break it down by status, the single largest group, about 920,000 people, are permanent residents.
Wow. Nearly a quarter of the total.
Yep. Yes. These are not transients. These are people who have jumped through all the hoops, lived there for 10 years, paid their taxes, and have no end date on their visa. They are part of the permanent fabric of the country.
So Japan is already an immigration society. The government just hasn't, updated the sign out front yet.
Precisely. And that refusal to update the signage causes all sorts of problems for the people actually trying to live there.
So let's humanize this a bit. Our source material breaks down these permanent resident hopefuls into 4 distinct categories, which I found really helpful. It stops us from just lumping everyone together.
Right. Every single person in that 3.95 million has a different story, a different motivation.
So the first category is the long-term worker. This feels like the backbone of the current economy.
Absolutely. These are the people keeping the lights on in those labor-starved industries. Caregiving for the elderly, manufacturing, food service, construction, they often enter on what's called the specified skilled worker visa.
And the nuance here is language, right?
Right.
I'm guessing if you're working a welding line, you don't need to be able to recite poetry.
Correct. The industry's so desperate for hands that the initial Japanese proficiency requirement is often quite low. But, and here's the trap, the worker's goal is usually to stay forever. So they're working these physically demanding jobs, long hours, while trying to bridge this massive language gap to qualify for permanent residency later. It is a very, very hard road.
Then you have the second group, which seems like the complete opposite, the highly skilled.
These are your global nomads, IT engineers, researchers, CEOs. They're high earners, they pay a lot in taxes, and generally they integrate into the economy pretty seamlessly. Japan and, every other developed nation is in a fierce war to attract these people.
Okay, and then group 3, the family unit. This one felt the most, poignant in the report.
It's the most critical for the future. These are people building a life foundation. The parents might be there for a job, but their children are in Japanese public schools.
Well,
and often, the kids speak Japanese as their first language, sometimes even better than their own parents do.
so the parents are struggling to read the school notices, but the kid is totally fluent.
Exactly. That family is anchored in Japan. They are not going anywhere.
And finally, the fourth category, which the report delightfully calls the Japan fan.
We all know someone like this. These are people drawn in by the soft power, the safety, the cleanliness, the anime, the food.
Sure.
They might have come as a student or a tourist and just decided, you know what, this is where I want to be. They're motivated by quality of life, not just a paycheck.
Speaking of Japan fans and that family unit category, there's a specific trend the source highlights about wealthy Chinese nationals. It seems like those two categories are merging in a really interesting way.
This is a huge subtrend. We are seeing a surge of wealthy Chinese families moving to Japan specifically for education. The report points to Bunkyo Ward in Tokyo.
Bunkyo Ward, that's the academic heart, right? That's where the University of Tokyo is.
It's the Harvard Square of Tokyo, if you will. And it's becoming an educational hub for these families. We're even seeing infrastructure pop up just for them, specifically cram schools in places like Takadanobaba.
But wait, cram schools, Juku, are a Japanese staple. Are these different?
They are. These are cram schools specifically designed to help Chinese students pass Japanese university entrance exams.
That seems like a massive hurdle. Why not just go to university in China or maybe the U.S.?
A couple of reasons. One, the competition in China, the Gaokao, is just brutally fierce. It's all or nothing.
I've heard.
Two, youth unemployment in China is quite high right now.
Yeah.
So Japan offers a kind of pressure release valve. And here's the key insight. Chinese speakers have a massive kanji advantage.
Because they already know the characters.
Right. For an American or European, learning to read Japanese is a mountain. You have to learn thousands of characters from scratch. For a Chinese speaker, the meaning of many characters is already clear, even if the pronunciation is different. It just lowers that barrier to entry significantly.
Which brings us to the group that doesn't have that advantage. The report spends a bit of time talking about India.
Yes. India is really the other side of that coin. There is huge interest from Indian engineers and IT professionals. They respect Japan's technology, they love the safety, but the language barrier it's a wall.
I've heard that spoken Japanese is actually not too hard for Hindi speakers because of the sentence structure, but the reading.
The reading and writing is the killer. Without that kanji background, reaching a highly skilled level of literacy takes years of dedicated study. Imagine trying to learn a completely new writing system while you're also working a 50-hour week as a software engineer.
The source mentions a political angle here too. Wasn't there a deal between former Prime Minister Ishiba and Prime Minister Modi?
There was an agreement to accept 50,000 Indian engineers, but the report, it casts some serious doubt on this. It basically asks, so where's the progress? It's easy for leaders to shake hands and sign a paper, but if you don't have the infrastructure to teach 50,000 people how to read kanji or navigate Japanese tax law, the deal just stalls.
Stalled is one problem, broken is another. And that, I think, leads us to the elephant in the room, the Technical Intern Training Program, or TITP.
This is where the whole Galapagos narrative stops being quirky and starts getting pretty dark.
The report calls the system distorted. That feels like a very polite diplomatic term for what sounds like an absolute mess.
Distorted is the key word. To understand why, you have to look at the gap between the ideal and the real. The TITP was designed with this noble humanitarian goal. international contribution.
Okay.
The idea was to bring people from developing nations to Japan, teach them a skill like advanced agriculture or machining, and then send them home to build up their own economies.
Aid through education. Sounds great on paper.
On paper, yes. In reality, the source argues it is undeniably a cover for securing cheap, unskilled labor. Japan has a shortage of bodies. This program provides them. Simple as that.
But is there any actual training happening, or is that part just a complete fiction?
There are unicorns. The source cites this fascinating example with JR Japan Railways. They're actually training Indian drivers on real Shinkansen trains in Japan.
Oh, right, for that new high-speed rail line in India using Japanese tech.
Exactly. They are learning strict safety management, timetable adherence down to the second. That is true technical transfer. But for every one of those, you have thousands of interns just picking vegetables or sewing clothes or putting toppings on convenience store bentos.
And the conditions for those thousands, the report doesn't really hold back.
It can't. We're talking about severe human rights issues. It starts before they even leave home. Brokers in countries like Vietnam or China charge these massive dispatch fees to get people into the program.
How does that work? Are they paying for the visa or something?
Essentially, yes. They're paying brokers and intermediaries to secure a placement. And we're talking up to 1 million yen.
Wow.
That's roughly 7,000 US dollars, which is an absolute fortune in rural Vietnam.
So they arrive in Japan already in massive debt.
It's debt bondage. Think about the leverage that gives an employer. The worker can't quit because they have to pay back that loan. They can't switch jobs because their visa is tied to that specific employer. And this power imbalance leads to passport confiscation, unpaid overtime, and in the worst cases, sexual violence.
The source even uses the phrase modern slavery, pointing to international criticism.
It does. And when you back people into a corner like that, what happens? They run. We see runaways disappearing into the black market economy or even turning to crime just out of desperation. It is a systemic failure.
But here's where it gets really interesting economically. It seems like the market is finally punishing Japan for this failure. The source talks about a Vietnam shift.
This is the economic reality check. For years, Vietnam was this endless well of labor for the program. It was a buyer's market for Japan. But Vietnam's economy is growing. Wages in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City are rising fast.
And at the same time, the Japanese yen has tanked over the last few years.
Exactly. So that wage gap, the whole incentive to come to Japan in the first place, it's shrinking. Why would a smart, capable Vietnamese worker pay a broker 1 million yen to work in a Japanese village for minimum wage when they could go to Korea or Taiwan or Australia and earn more with better rights?
So Japan is no longer the buyer of labor. It's competing for it, and it's starting to lose.
Exact. The report notes that the quality of applicants is dropping because the top talent is just looking elsewhere. And rural Japan, which relies on these interns, is starting to panic.
So the current system is unethical, and it's failing economically. The source material doesn't just complain, though. It offers a manifesto, a proposal for a completely new system.
The core argument of this proposal is just, stop lying. Stop pretending this is training. Admit that Japan is an immigration nation and build a transparent, fair system to replace the TITP.
And they outline 4 pillars of reform. Let's walk through these because this is effectively a blueprint for Japan's future. Pillar 1, clear permanent residency criteria.
This is about raising the bar but making it visible. Currently, the language requirement for interns is very low, maybe N4 or N3 on the JLPT scale.
Okay, let's clarify that for people. What's N4 versus N3?
So the JLPT, the Japanese language proficiency test, goes from N5, which is total beginner, up to N1, which is near native. N4 is basic survival Japanese, whereas the train station, I have a stomach ache.
Got it.
N3 is conversational. You can chat about the weather, your hobbies.
But the proposal suggests requiring N2 for permanent residency.
Right. And N2 is a massive jump. N2 is business level. It requires you to understand abstract news articles, handle complex business conversations, and know about 1,000 kanji.
That is a huge hurdle. It's basically saying we will let you stay, but only if you are fully functional in our society.
Precisely. Plus, verified tax records and an understanding of history and culture. No free rides.
Okay. Pillar 2, a points-based system.
This is borrowing from the playbooks of places like Canada or Australia. Instead of some vague judgment, you score candidates on objective data, age, education, career history, specific skills. If you hit the score, you get in. It removes the ambiguity and, crucially, the power of those brokers.
It sounds much more meritocratic. Now, Pillar 3 struck me as the most human one, family integration.
This is really the moral center of the proposal. The source argues that if Japan accepts a worker, it has to accept a human being. And human beings have families. But to understand why they emphasize this so much, you have to look back at history.
It references a specific historical tragedy here, the returnee war orphans.
Yes, this is crucial context. After World War II, many Japanese children were left behind in China during the chaotic retreat. Decades later, in the 70s and 80s, they and their families were allowed to return to Japan, but they didn't speak Japanese, and the government provided almost no support.
So they were ethnically Japanese, but culturally they were Chinese.
Exactly. And because they had no language support, they faced discrimination, poverty, and isolation. Their children dropped out of school. It created this marginalized underclass.
So the argument in the proposal is, do not let history repeat itself with today's immigrant children?
Precisely. If we bring them here, we have a moral obligation to ensure their kids learn Japanese and don't end up isolated. You cannot just import a worker. You import a future citizen.
Which leads right into the final pillar, Pillar 4, community coexistence.
Which is essentially just public funding for language education. You can't have coexistence if neighbors literally cannot speak to each other. The report identifies the inability to communicate as the #1 stressor for foreign residents.
It seems so obvious, and yet it's not really happening at scale right now.
It's mostly been left to volunteers and local nonprofits. The proposal says the state needs to own this.
So we have a clear problem and a clear proposal, but I want to circle back to something you hinted at earlier, the economics of it all.
Yes, this is the catch-22.
The proposal is asking for really high standards N2 language skills, a points-based entry. But we just established that Japan is losing its economic appeal because of the weak yen and rising wages elsewhere.
And that is the final provocation I want to leave with you, the listener.
Lay it out.
Japan is trying to pivot from what was basically a backdoor immigration policy, cheap, low-skilled, unregulated, to a front-door policy that's high-skilled, transparent, and has high standards. And that is objectively the right thing to do for society and for human rights. But can they afford to be that picky? If you demand N2 level Japanese, which takes years of intense study, and your wages are lower than Australia or Korea, or even rising wages in parts of China, will anyone actually come?
That's the billion-yen question, isn't it? Is the Japan brand, the safety, the culture, the lifestyle, is that strong enough to outweigh the lower wages and the high barrier to entry?
Or does raising the bar just mean you end up with no workers, which just accelerates the demographic collapse you're trying to prevent?
It's a huge gamble, but it seems like the alternative, just sticking with the distorted status quo, is a guaranteed loss.
I agree. The current system is collapsing under its own weight. Reform is risky, but it's absolutely necessary. The Galapagos days are over. Now they have to survive in the open ocean.
It's a story that is going to define the next decade of Japan, for sure. We'll be watching closely to see if they can pull off this pivot. Thanks for guiding us through all the data today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. If you're in Japan, look around. The face of the country is changing right before our eyes. We'll see you next time.